Shall we try that again, shall we? This is Freeman Jack with TNS Radio on tns.ning.com. 6 hours later, Vin's finally beaten the gremlins out of the server, chased them down the road with a big stick and set his dogs on them. So hopefully they won't be back tonight. If anyone not tuned in, please do so now to put the radio through its paces. We'd like lots of people that aren't listening or in the chat box to tune in, please. Alright? Okay? Right, now, where were we? I suppose I've got a couple of hours to fill. I'm late. I'm bloody late. Feck off. Well, I did try and come on the air at 3 o'clock, but I had something come up, so I've been spinning tunes now solidly for, my God, that's got to be like 7, nearly 8 hours. I've been playing tunes for. That's not a bad collection, I think, to be able to dig 8 hours of straight, back-to-back different tunes. There might have been a couple of repeats in there, because I was actually playing it on autoplayer a lot of the time and not listening, so you might have got doubled up a few times. Oh, go on then. I don't normally do requests, but seeing as I'm in a particularly average mood tonight, I'm gonna play one. But if it's rubbish, I think you'll have Robin Hood to blame for this one. So, Robin, don't ask again if it's rubbish, okay? If it's good, you can send me a few, because it's always handy to get one up on dubs.
Down the system, keep the fire burning. Teach the youth what them need to be learning. Burn down the government, keep the fire blazing. Whole world gone crazy.
Well, that was average. Sorry, Robin, but no, that was distinctly average. Don't send me any more links. No, you can, but you need to raise your game a bit. Look, nobody's answering bloody Skype. Everyone said, oh, yeah, I'll come on the show. Yeah, of course. Alright, okay, nobody's ready yet. Sodom. Alright, okay, well, I'm going to get on with what I was doing then. Alright, look, Sodom. Let me get this Word document up. Not on that bloody screen. You get over here. Alright, can't see the chat box for a bit. Right. Keep coming up against this time and time again. The use of the term freeman. Now, in case anybody isn't completely bored of hearing me say that I took the name Freeman Jack as an ironic joke, having looked into where the term freeman came from, and on finding that it basically meant the favoured of the baron, or somebody who had gained favour with the baron due to services rendered, could be declared a freeman, but essentially their tenure as a freeman didn't extend to their children. I found out recently that it did actually extend to their wives as widows, but not during their married lives. Once the husbands died, the widow was able to carry on the benefits of freemanry. But essentially, it's what we now call the social contract. Essentially, the security of tenure, that being part of a guild, would allow you, due to the monopolies of the guilds, essentially meant that you could be protected from the baronial tyranny, but the cost of that protection was essentially paying tithe, paying tax to the guild, and in fact the name guild comes from the term for the collection of taxes. Anyway, here's a little bit that I dug out, and so I'm going to go through this. Alright, let's go back before the Normans, before the priesthood, back into the glorious days of ancient Rome. Now, it had a lot going for it, Christians being fed to lions, you know what I mean? Bestiality, in orgies, lots of red wine flowing in the streets, bloody straight roads, viaducts, education, police, judiciary. But other than that, what have the bloody Romans ever done for us? Don't really like that. Right, okay, slavery in ancient Rome. In Rome, former slaves became freedmen, liberati, usually taking the family name of their former master as their own. And though they were no longer seen as an object in the eyes of the law, they still did not gain all the rights of a Roman citizen, though their children did if born free. Freedmen could not follow in the Roman political career or cursus honorium. However, they could become a wealthy tradesman or member of the priesthood of the emperor, a highly respected position. A highly successful freedman could become an advisor to the emperor himself, a tradition started by Augustus and fostered by his successors. In both Greek and Roman societies, ex-slaves required the permission of their former master to marry. So we then jump forward from that time into Anglo-Saxon times. Now, I actually find some of this about the Anglo-Saxon and possibly a little spurious, but it then leads into the Norman, which I feel is possibly the more accurate. But anyway, the slaves of Anglo-Saxon times were regarded as the stock of their owner. Now, this is the interesting bit. Their offences against a third person must be answered for as if for the mischief done by his cattle. They had no credibility, no legal rights. Wrongs done to them were regarded as wrongs done by them were regarded as wrongs done to their master. Practice indeed was to kinder to them than legal theory. Hold on. Oh, right, sorry. Practice indeed was... Oh, blimey. Let me put my reading glasses on. That might help. Put my binoculars on so I can see the screen. Right, where are we? Sorry. Practice indeed was kinder to them than legal theory, as in the case of the Roman peculium. They were in some unexplained way allowed to keep their savings and so to purchase their freedom, and thus the spiritual law could enforce a penance on the master for ill-treating. There were the laws of Ethelbert and Canute. Now, Canute's an interesting character. Anybody that was taught any part of Canute in history would probably have been taught the part where he's arguing with the priest over who is the highest law in the land, and he declares that by the divine right of king that he is essentially the word of God, and the priest basically offers him out for a bet and says, all right, I bet you can't keep the sea back, you know what I mean? My God's all powerful, he'll make the tide come in whether you want it to or not, see if you can hold it back. And the propaganda is that Canute, in his pride and his puffed up ego, demanded that his throne be taken to the edge of the seashore, where he sat and duly got his feet wet. I personally think that's possibly papist propaganda, because what I'm coming across about Canute certainly points to him being quite a rambunctious character and quite possibly anti-papist. I don't know, I haven't quite got that far yet, but certainly fairly rebellious. Right, there were laws of Ethelbert and Canute forbidding the sale of men to heathen masters. So, okay, we've got Canute and Ethelbert basically bringing in the first of, I suppose, English civil rights laws, in as much as slaves were no longer allowed to be sold to men who were considered heathen, i.e. were not Christian in their nature. One would assume that Christian masters would afford the slaves some degree of the brutality that perhaps the pagan slave masters may have had. And the slave trade, the principal seat of which was Bristol, was put down by the preaching of St. Wulstan. The villain of the Doomsday Book is not a slave. No, villain is, we now think of it as a criminal, but a villain was essentially a villager, a serf. The villain of the Doomsday Book is not a slave. He represents the Anglo-Saxon Ceorl. He is an irremovable cultivator and now regarded as a customary tenant of the Lord. So one would assume from that under the Enclosures Act that the land was issued to the barons, but that the serf class was considered to be irremovable, to have some sort of given rights to cultivate the land, and certainly, as it says, is regarded as a customary tenant of a lord. The Norman knights probably confounded with the Valanus, the Bordiare, and the other tenants who stood in less favourable footing, whilst the free Ceorl became villain. The service disappeared altogether. Right, so essentially what he's saying is that there was a bit of kind of class mobility amongst the established classes, and it's suggesting that the service, which I would assume would be the slave class, disappeared altogether. The position which the class constituted by this fusion came to occupy what was one compatible with much personal comfort and some social ambition. The villains were safe in the possession of their homes. They had a remedy against the violence of their masters. Right, this is quite interesting. They could, if they chose to renounce their holdings. So again, I suppose this is to break the social contract with their master, that the master provides them with dwellings and suitable employment in exchange for their cultivation of his lands. If they chose to renounce their holdings and take refuge in a town, they could become members of a guild, and there, when unclaimed for a year and a day, obtain the full rights of freemen. Now, yes, that is true, would appear to be true anyway from what I've been reading, but in order to become a member of a guild was in fact a master craftsman. And in order to rise to the ranks of master craftsman, you had to be indentured into the guild as an apprentice. And as an apprentice, you would essentially pay your master a small sum for his teaching, his tutelage of you. So before you even get to get anywhere near a guild, you would have to spend several years as an apprentice, and only after a number of years as an apprentice be deemed trustworthy enough to be accepted into the position of journeyman. Now, journeyman comes from the French de jour, I think, day. Essentially, a journeyman was a day labourer, somebody who you would employ on a daily rate, and who held no other ties to you. So essentially a craftsman, so a stonemason of the lower orders of the stonemasonry craft would essentially be hired on a daily basis rather than on a contract, and as such they were known as journeymen. They would also travel, which is possibly where we get the word journey from. The guildsmen, the journeymen guildsmen of Europe were widely travelled in and spread a lot of the information about the making of coloured glasses and of the kind of Gothic architecture that spread across Europe shortly after the Normans came to power. Oh, back on with my specs. Right, where was I? Right, okay, so if they chose to renounce their holdings, take refuge in a town, become members of the guild, and there, when unclaimed for a year and a day, obtain the full rights of freemen. They could obtain manumission by the intervention of the church. Now, manumission would be the freeing of a slave. By the intervention of the church, which I'm assuming means that if they were to accept a position as a member of the clergy, to take up the cloth, which always proclaimed the liberation of a villain to be a work of merit on the part of the master. So I assume that handing over a slave, a serf class, over to the priesthood, over to the clergy, to be taken up under the cloth, would probably be seen as like putting a penny in the collections dish when it went round. Right, under a fairly good lord, under a monastery or college, the villain enjoyed immunities and securities that might be envied by his superiors. He had a ready tribunal for his wrongs, a voice in the management of his village, and he might with a little contrivance redeem his children and start them in a higher state of life. Bloody like that. Right. Where were we? Okay, so and this time, the 12th century, the villeins were educating their ignoble offsprings in the liberal arts. In the early part of the 14th century, it was a mere legal form that the villeins were described as less than free. In the reign of Richard II, it seems that the legal theory of their status has become hardened and sharpened so as to warrant almost wanton oppression. But social causes, on the other hand, have ameliorated their actual lot. It was not their normal condition that led to the insurrection of 1381, but the enforcement of the Statute of Labourers and the attempt of the lords to reassert legal claims which were practically obsolete. Serfdom died out in England without any special legislation against it. All over Europe, serfdom was outlawed. It was written into the law books that it was outlawed. It was an outlawed practice. It could not be practiced anymore. England somehow managed to basically make out that serfdom had been done away with without actually writing it into the law books. Certainly it would appear that the Black Death would have played its hand in there because of the strengthening of the guilds and of the craft trades after the plague. Their hand was hugely strengthened, and there was a great improvement in workmen's wages and conditions with the shortage of able-bodied men. I mean, some of the cathedrals, the work stopped on them for 30 years during that period because there simply wasn't anybody to do the work anymore. Right, okay. Right, Hallam mentions as the latest deed of enfranchisement one of Elizabeth I in 1574 in favour of the bondsman on some of her manors, and it appears that in Scotland the workers in coal and salt mines were in a state of serfdom until they were liberated by the acts of the 15th and 39th years of the reign of George III. Okay, so essentially we have serfs in the state of serfdom coming pretty bloody close to the modern day there. Right, okay, so let's just go back to this civic honour. Right, in replacement of the ancient position of freeman, we still have the honorary freemen, such as mayors and Rotarians and stuff will often be granted the keys to the city. As a Londoner, the guilds still parade several times a year through the centre of the city. The Mayor of London, not Boris Johnson, the other one, the real Mayor of London. Oh, bloody hell! Give me a bloody light you get. In all his finery and his gilded bloody horse-drawn coach and all that is led round London by the guildsmen of today. Right, okay, in a contemporary society, the award of honorary freedom of the city or borough tends to be entirely ceremonial. Well, I would question that we see so many things that are we're told has been reduced to a ceremonial position in society, when in fact we look into it and the powers that were granted to that position are still in place. and those powers are still being exercised. Right, so it tends to be entirely ceremonial, given by the local government in many towns and cities on those who have served in some exceptional capacity, or upon any whom the city wishes to bestow an honour, footballers, businessmen, etc., etc. Today, the grant of honorary freedom in the United Kingdom is governed by the Local Government Act 1972. So if you want to become freemen and women of the UK, get on your Local Government Act 1972, as amended by the Local Democracy, Economic Development and Construction Act 2009. Doesn't that just make you glow with pride? The 72 Act enabled councils of cities, royal boroughs and parishes, or in Wales communities with the status of a royal town, to confer the status of honorary freemen on persons of distinction and persons who have, in the opinion of the council, rendered eminent services to the local area. The 2009 Act extends the ability to grant the status of freeman to any county, city, district, borough, town, parish or community council, so removing the requirement for the town to have royal status. That's because it would be meaningless anyway. We have no royalty. And also enabling county councils to confer the honour to anybody that they want to grease the backhander of. A special meeting of the council can grant the honour by passing a resolution with a 2/3 majority at a specially convened meeting. So just make sure you don't give any of your bloody councils a 2/3 majority in any of the major parties. The key to the city is awarded and is used in many places in a manner similar to the freedom of the city. An ornamental key is presented to esteemed visitors and residents or others the city wishes to honour, evoking medieval walled cities whose gates were guarded during the day and locked at night. The key symbolises the freedom of the recipient to enter and leave the city at will and as a trusted friend of the city's residents. Okay. Alright, well that's that little piece there. I just kind of trawled that off the... right, okay. I think that we need, again, to codify language here, that the bandying around of terms like sovereign and free man, I've been thinking about Vin's take about personal sovereignty, and personal sovereignty starting with the statement I am. And I wonder if perhaps we need to find a term which simply codifies in clear terms what it is to know that you are, that I am that I am, and know the force and the power in the law as it's written that position holds. Anyway, that's me kind of shooting the breeze. Let's have a look and see if the lads are back on Skype yet, or if they're all too busy getting pissed. Right, let's have a look. So I suppose the point of this being that rather than referring to pieces of paper that old men wrote a very long time ago for reasons that were essentially, if we know ourselves truly and fully, and know that in order to live without the bounds of statute law, we must conduct ourselves in an entirely honourable, moral way, then the understanding of I am and the power of I am, also the power of, combined with the power of no, are two incredibly powerful little terms side by side. And something that Tom Campbell made me think about recently in one of his lectures was that I've always struggled with the concept of good and bad, good and evil, right and wrong. And he states that there is none of that in the universe. There is simply constructive and destructive, and that essentially constructive is that which we generally consider to be good, and destructive is that which we generally consider to be bad, when in fact it's more the case that constructive is moving in the direction of the flow of the universe, from high entropy, low complexity to low entropy and high complexity, and that's an inexorable flow. And so anything that essentially stands to deconstruct, to destroy, is moving in the opposite direction to the rest of the flow of nature. So essentially, if we can stop looking at things in terms of good and bad, good or evil, right and wrong, and simply look to see if they can be seen as constructive, or if they are purely destructive, or if they are a combination of the two, if they are mostly constructive or mostly destructive, and that this requires some quite careful thinking, because even when you think of construct and you think of our building block going up a large steel building constructed, well, it's actually, yes, the building is constructed, but look at what is needed to be done in order to construct that building. I mean, vast swathes of destruction, huge earthen pits dug out to dig the concrete and the steel and the components for the glass, huge factories belching out smoke and fumes and dust and pollution to produce the materials, the transport required to take them to the site. And so if a new building is to be seen as good in this new paradigm, as constructive, then it would have to have a net result of a gain, a construction, rather than a net result of some construction with that has come entirely from a lot of destruction. So that's I suppose we all find ourselves standing against a lot of things without, and feeling it without necessarily being able to intellectualise that argument. And I think perhaps that should help to clear some of those lines of thought. Anyway, I was looking to have somebody fucking to chat to. Where are you all? Everyone said, oh yeah, I'll come on the show with you. Yeah, that was until they all got pissed. Here's me drinking my tea, being a good boy. Oh well, let's dig out a tune, see what we've got in the old bag here. Yeah, let's have a bit of that, a bit of Ian Brown. I know that Alvin quite likes this one.
Trouble so hard, ooh Lord, trouble so hard. Don't nobody know my trouble but God. Don't nobody know.
That was Moby and Go, I think. Was it? No, Natural Blues. What the fuck am I talking about? Yeah, so the point with this, the attention to this situation is that, in my mind, the problems that we're currently living under can be drawn back in a fairly straight line to the Enclosures Act, to the Norman Conquest, to the Domesday Book, to the Magna Carta. Certainly, historical evidence points to the period immediately before the Norman conquests having been a time of great lateral mobility amongst the classes, and that basically anybody through hard work and keen endeavour could rise through the ranks, certainly of the lower classes, and rise to a position of some wealth and influence. Certainly, if you drive through Suffolk and Norfolk, you'll see large Saxon kind of what would appear to us to be manor houses, certainly mansion houses, and a lot of these would in fact be these untitled landed folk who had basically got fat off of the productivity of the Garden of England, as it was, during that period. Now, for the 200 years following the Norman invasion, we have skeletal remains showing vast rates of child starvation, child poverty, malnourishment, rickets, bad teeth. All of these things all suddenly seem to spring into the sort of common man as regular ailments, almost exactly coincident with the Normans moving the barons in. Now, what we've got to realise is that the Norman invasion, we're not talking about millions of Frenchmen coming across. We're talking about a part of the English royal family fighting itself, or fighting another part of the English nobility. That Alfred and William were essentially related cousins or something along those lines. And essentially it would appear that Alfred was being a bit of a naughty boy and not doing as the Pope told him. And also the grip of the papacy on some of the outlying territories like England, Ireland and Wales, and some of the Nordic countries was fairly tenuous because of the distances involved. So essentially, in order to sort of roll out the New World Order as was envisaged in 1066, the papist troops of William had to be marched into the country, and as a result of the Battle of Hastings and the resultant victory on the part of the Normans, we have the drawing up of the Domesday Book, which is essentially the first ever book of nationwide taxation. It was essentially an audit for the chattel that William had now acquired due to his victory in battle. The only trouble is, because he had essentially usurped a standing King of England, he was never going to be received into the bosom of the English heartlands. So the only way for William to maintain his grip on this taxation stream, this huge swathe of chattel that he had just acquired, was essentially to instill the barons, the knights that he'd brought with him from France, a brutal and battle-hardy bunch that were greedy to the nines, and essentially build embattlements, which we now see as castles. The great famous British castles that we're also bloody proud of are all a fucking French invention, built and designed specifically to keep the Frenchman inside safe while he raped the arse out of the British countryside and people. So during the Enclosures Act, essentially everything in this country, everything in this island, was divided up between the Crown and the Church. The Church held the alloidal property title to all church lands, and other than those church lands, everything became essentially property of the state, became property of the Crown. Now, these crown estates were divided up into many of the manors that we still see holding wide swathes of sort of Berkshire and Herefordshire and places like this are still essentially still boundaried by their Enclosures Act's borders. So what we have are these baronial fiefdoms where a robber baron would sit on essentially a local throne over his chattel, his serfs, his underclasses, and from this underclass, anybody that could grovel, connive, and serve his French master well enough to become a trusted chosen, they would be elevated to the status of Freeman of England, and that this title would bestow many liberties and securities upon them, but it would also bring them into essentially a taxed class. So again, it's this social contract. It's this very early sort of contract where we'll protect you, we'll look after you, we'll keep the wolf from your door. Sign on the dotted line. And when you sign on the dotted line, you find in the small print that you'll be giving half your wages to the baron, and the other half will be split between you and the king, or you and the bloody church. Now, as I said, there was another way out of this, that if you were being mistreated by your baronial landmaster, apparently you could run off to the city. Well, as I pointed out, that in order to be able to access the protections of a guild, you're looking at a minimum of 12 years as an apprentice and as a journeyman. I'm sure that both apprentices and journeymen would have been afforded some protection by having been under the auspices of a master of a guild, and that this would have probably have kept the baron at bay for his year and a day. But still, nothing like the kind of freedoms that we think may have come from being a freed man. Right, what have we got going on now? Right, anybody in the chat box, anybody at all, fancy calling in? You're all being very, very busy. Oh, Zoran Matic. Yeah, go on then.